What's going on, guys? Pat here, and in this episode of the Engine Swap series, we are finally installing the LS7 in this thing. Well, finally, after 3 months of doing the sheet metal work to the firewall, the cowl, and the trans tunnel, it's done. So that means we can finally drop the engine in and get going on the fun part of the swap. Not that I hate metal work, but it's not really my favorite thing to do, and it's not nearly as exciting as what we're about to do, at least to me. Now, since the last video, the only thing that changed is I wet sanded and buffed the firewall. It's the only progress we've made. And with that, we're pretty much done with all the fabrication work. There's gonna be some supports and gussets that get welded in, but that's not going to be until after, because I need to have the exhaust up in place, so roughly where it's gonna be, and have everything in to get an idea of where I can add bracing and where I can't. But I'd say 99% of the fabrication work's done, so that means we can finally drop the engine in, get going on wiring in the Terminator X-Max fuel injection, plumbing the dry sump, plumbing the new fuel setup, putting in the new radiator, all that good stuff. All the fun part of doing the engine swap. Now, the LS7 is over here. It's been sitting in its cocoon just to protect it from dust and whatnot, so we're gonna have to unwrap it soon. But before we drop the engine in, there are a couple things that need to happen. Nothing major, just trying to knock those out first so I can get this engine in and we can really start making good progress on this. And we're gonna modify these UMI mounts. Now, we're not modifying them because of UMI's design or anything to do with their product. It's just for our specific application and setting the engine back. You can see here on this mount that the back of the mount overhangs from the K-member, and that means when the engine's revving and pulling, there's gonna be a little bit of a moment arm from back here all the way up to here. So what our plan is to put in a 1/4 inch plate on the bottom side of this and weld it to this plate, and we'll have 2 bolts on the back side. See if I can move the camera here to get a better view. So we'll add a couple bolts on the back side here with a triangulated gusset. Not sure if I'm explaining it the best. As we're working on the mounts, I'll film so you guys kind of get an idea of what we're doing and why. But in addition to that, we also need to touch up the frame. When I took the old engine mounts off, it had ripped the paint I had put down last year off. I think I put the mounts on a little prematurely and just tore it off, which is weird because it's adhered well everywhere else and we didn't have that problem, but need to touch that up. So those are really the last 2 things. Then we can put the clutch and bell housing on the engine, index bell housing, put the new throw bearing on the trans, and really start getting going on this. So there's gonna be a lot of progress on this video happening really fast. The day I'm filming this, we have, it was 2 weeks from yesterday that the event we want to go shake this car down is. So we got 13 days now, which means we really got like a week to get the car running. I want to have the car running at least a week before the event, just to get miles in, to break in the clutch, get an idea of what the car is like, see if we have any major issues or anything. So it's going to be a very quick progress, but we don't want to rush anything. So it's finding that middle ground between working efficiently but also not rushing through stuff. We've put a lot of effort into this swap. But a lot of the custom stuff that requires a lot of thought is done at this point. So a lot of it is just, plug and play and, using pre-made parts. We're not really having to engineer too much at this point. So I'm gonna rip these mounts off and start prepping them, and then I will catch up with you guys once we're starting to modify them. All right, so figured I'd check in. Been making some good progress on these engine mounts. You can see here, I have the new piece welded on there. So I got my bead laid. I'm only gonna do one side because if I try and put a bead on the back side of it, it's gonna interfere with the frame and not fit well. So this should be sufficient. If we run into issues in the future, I'll adjust it, but I think we're gonna be good. So hopefully this gives a little more insight to what I was talking about earlier in the video. So obviously we have the mount here that is gonna sit on the frame, and then this is gonna sit on the back side here. And so the plan is that we are going to just put the frame, the mount back on the frame, and then we'll drill 2 holes through that plate and the frame and do 2 more nuts and bolts there, just as added insurance. I mean, theoretically, there's no more of a moment arm because the distance from the engine mount to the bolts hasn't changed. So there's no more of a moment arm than there was if it was in the factory location. But my concern would be on the side of the engine that's getting pushed down, because obviously as the engine rotates, one side's lifting and one side's compressing. I don't know if I have that backwards or not as far as the direction of rotation, but hypothetically, let's say this is the side that's getting pushed down. You have your force of your engine now pushing on this mount. If it's fully seated on the K-member, then that's not a problem because you're just pushing into the K-member. But if you have some hanging off, there's the potential that now you have moment arms, so you're going to be pushing it down, and you're going to have a little more leverage on these bolts since it's hanging off the back there. and so the plate on the back should just be added support and help with that. I think it's going to be more than enough. You know, 1/4 inch plate with a nice bead on there with 2 more bolts really shouldn't be an issue. You know, maybe I'll come up with a different design in the future if we do have problems, but I think that's going to be more than enough. So I'm letting those cool down. They're pretty warm. They've been sitting for probably half hour now, and they're still at like 150 degrees. I just put a infrared thermometer on them. So in the meantime, I'm going to start cleaning this up. I'm not going to paint this yet. I'm going to wait until we drill those 2 holes in the back, and then I'll paint all that and touch that up, and then I'm either going to go powder coat these at my buddy's shop or just rattle can them here for now to get this thing going and powder coat them in the future. But I'm going to keep chipping away on these things, and then I'll check in with you guys once I've made some more progress. Well, we had a bit of a late night last night out here in the shop. I think my dad and I were out here till like 11:30. It's currently 7 a.m. the next day, so a little tired. But as you guys saw in the time lapse, we finally got the engine and trans installed in this thing. We tried things a little differently this time. We installed the trans on the back of the engine. Just because with how light this engine is, it wasn't really much weight to load onto this. And you know, we had 2 people here, so we just wanted to try it. You know, it seemed a lot easier to get the transmission lined up and on the engine outside of the car and then drop the whole assembly. And then it worked out pretty well. We had to be, you know, careful trying to wedge it in because we don't have the attachment to set the angle on the engine hoist. So I always had to be careful there. But look at that, finally, and after our, you know, putting this order in September for this engine and months of sheet metal work and mocking up, we finally have this thing installed and we're ready to start hooking everything up to get this thing running. Now, last you guys saw, I was welding on the mounts and just taking care of some miscellaneous things. Those are done. I don't know how well you can see them in here, but ended up just rattle canning them. We'll powder coat them eventually, but it actually turned out decent for just a rattle can job. I also touched up the frame sections, which you can't really see because the engine's kind of casting a shadow on it, but I touched up the spots where the paint came off with that. Even though it's the exact same paint and the exact same finish, for some reason it's way glossier than what's there, so I'm hoping as it heats up and kind of bakes next to the header and gets dirty and just ages over the course of a year, it'll match. It's kind of strange that there's such a discrepancy even though it's the same paint. Another big thing I was working on was some fabrication stuff under the car, which I'll come and show you guys. See how well the GoPro works under the dark sections of the car here. Now, over here was really where we were doing our fab work. Now you can see on this mount how it has an adjustment slot for the crossbar bolt holes that goes all the way up, and then over here on this one, half of it's gone. And the reason we did that is because to clearance the headers for the swap, we had to put a pretty big notch, which you can see here, and that meant there was like no material thickness between the slot and the rest of this. So the slot used to come all the way up, and then there was like hardly anything there. And so we were concerned that that was going to break and then compromise the transmission mount. So what we ended up doing was I cut this out, and then I just made a fill-in plate and then welded it in. Because we're not using that section of the slot. All of our adjustment is back here, and we're all the way back, so we really don't even need all this. We just need this section where the cross member actually lays. So it's significantly stronger now. So I went back through, touched all that up with paint once we'd wrapped that up. And yeah, so we got a few bolts in here now. Nothing too crazy. We just wanted to get this up and in, and then as we make final tweaks and adjustments, then you know, we'll put all the hardware and finally install everything. But so it just took forever to take care of all the little stuff yesterday. Those engine mounts, oh man, they were a nightmare. Trying to get the nuts and bolts in there. I know a lot of people install them backwards, where they put the bolt up through the bottom and then they'll do the nut and the washer on the top. I didn't really want to have that protruding up into the engine bay. I just don't think it looks good. So we, you know, installed them as they should be installed, but it was just a nightmare. You know, with the control arms were in the way. Even if we were to move them, we just had to get in there at weird angles. We had to like put washers on magnets and feed them in, and it was just a pain. That we probably spent like 3.5 hours doing that. So what we ended up doing was we put the bolt through, and then on the back side it's a flat washer and a lock washer. So we put that on a magnet, hold it up, and then hold that in place with a screwdriver, and then put the nut on the magnet, feed that up, and start it. So that's how we ended up doing that. It just took us a while to get to that method. But yeah, that sucked. That was probably a big reason why it took so long to get the engine installed. As far as other things that happened since the last clip, we put the clutch on, did the dial indicator on the bell housing, check for run now. That was good. So yeah, everything you know, is coming together now at this point. We got the trans back in, obviously. Yeah, I mean, now we're to the point where we can really start slamming on this thing, getting it together. You know, we got to hang the dry sump tank. I need to get the wheel well out here and start getting an idea of where to put the breather tank over here, how to run the lines. Gotta start working on the exhaust, doing all the wiring for the EFI. One thing I was trying to figure out yesterday is I believe the engine builder tuned this on a GM map sensor. I think I have it in a box over here, because with the Terminator you can use a built-in map sensor. There's a blue hose coming off the ECU, or you can run an external one like this. This is like a stock LS7 style 1-bar map sensor, and to install that you have to drill the bottom of the intake. It has like pre-made spots in the casting, but they're plugged with plastic. So I don't know how well the camera will see it, but it's like up under the intake. So I think we're gonna have to pull the intake off to drill that to run the map sensor. I could just run a vacuum hose off like a barb and tie it into this one off the ECU. But it's already been tuned and calibrated and set up for that map sensor, and I'd rather just run that one, because like if the Holly one dies eventually, like it's a lot easier to just change out one on the intake than it is to send that to Holly to get that serviced. So yeah, that's where we're at now that this is all installed and good. There is a lot of small things I need to start doing. We want to bleed the clutch or the throwout bearing, so we can just actuate the clutch a little bit. The trans was pretty tight going in. That was something we had noticed. We were all lined up, everything looked good. We had like gotten it halfway installed and it just felt so tight. We're like, we gotta take this apart because something's like horribly wrong. But everything looked good. The pilot bearing looked good. There was, the pressure plate was aligned. Everything looked as it should. So my dad just wants to see if we can actuate it a little bit, just to see if we can help, you know, settle everything and seat it. But I think we're in a good spot with the trans now. It ended up sucking up once we were going around and tightening it up. But yeah, I don't want to trash a very expensive center force triad, so just gotta keep that in mind. We got the Terminator X-Max wiring harness all set up here. So yesterday while I was working on some of the fabrication stuff, my dad was going in and stripping out the old EFI stuff. You can see a lot of it's up in the dash there. Took out like the MSD box because we're not going to need that anymore. There's certain wires that'll carry over, like the wiring out to the fuel pump. Some of the main power wires, like 12 volt switch, we can still just kind of leave in place, and maybe pin them out of the Sniper and pin them into the Terminator. But there's a lot of changes in wiring, so we need to get going on that. We're gonna keep taking out the old EFI stuff, start laying in the new harness. I'm gonna start mocking up some of the stuff, and I'll check up with you guys once we are a little further along of getting things installed. Well, we have unfortunately encountered our first big problem in doing the LS7 swap. You'll see here that the transmission is no longer attached to the LS7. It is back out of the car. Now, in the last clip, I had said that the transmission felt pretty tight while it was going in, and you know, as we were tightening the bolts to snug it down, just didn't feel quite right. And once everything was installed and we had the cross membrane and stuff, we decided to just go in and snug it up, get everything, you know, fully torqued as it needed to be. And something felt horribly wrong here. I believe usually you're trying to shoot for 35 to 45 foot-pounds for the torque spec for these bolts to the bell housing, and it felt like we were having to give it like 90 or 100 to get that transmission flush up against the bell housing. So it was binding, or something was misaligned somewhere. It felt really wrong, and there's way too much money in this engine and clutch and trans setup to take a chance and just hope it's going to work out. So, you know, and in past experience, I've learned that if you kind of pretend like an issue isn't there, that doesn't solve it. You know, you got to address it as it comes up, even if it's going to delay things and it's frustrating. But you know, it's worth it in the long run just to look into this now and address it. So took it back out, started looking at things. You know, I measured the outside diameter of the input shaft and also like the inside diameter of the pilot bearing once it was squeezed up in the crank. Everything looked good there. We put the alignment tool back in. Everything was perfectly aligned. Nothing had shifted. And so that kind of pointed me in the direction that maybe I should recheck that measurement on the index plate. Now, for those of you who don't know, the index plate is a tool that is 100% necessary and required to do aftermarket bell housing installations according to some people, and other people say you don't need it, just throw it together. And what it's doing is you bolt it to the bell housing, and then you bolt the bell housing to the engine, and you have the flywheel on the engine, and you're basically checking for misalignment between the input shaft of the transmission and the crank. Now, if that's misaligned to, you know, a high degree, I believe the clearance or the measurement you're shooting for is 5 thousandths variation or less side to side on your measurement. Then you can side load the input shaft, so you can break the case, break the input shaft, and get bad vibrations. It can be difficult to shift. You know, there's a whole slew of issues, so it's something that, in my opinion, is worth checking on any aftermarket bell housing. And so the way you do it, at least per QuickTime, is you set up your dial indicator, you spin it around, you find your high spot, so your highest measurement, and you zero it there, and then everything is referenced based off that. So this was the high point on ours, so that's our zero mark. So you can see side to side we had 12.5 thousandths versus 12 thousandths here. It's a little erased, so half thousandths difference. Everything looks good, no problem there. But when you look from our zero mark across from that, we are 5 times the limit of what's allowable for measurement. So I think that's kind of the red flag for why things didn't feel right, and why this thing didn't want to go together smoothly, because that's off by a lot. I'm honestly surprised a brand new block from GM and a brand new QuickTime bell housing is that far misaligned. Now, had I been paying closer attention, or, you know, thought a little more, I honestly could have recognized this earlier, because when we put the bell housing on the engine, all of the bolt holes lined up except for one. There's a couple on the bottom here that bolt into the back of the oil pan, and one of them didn't fully align. It was ever so slightly off, and I figure, you know what, it's probably just you know, it just kind of got through quality control. That one hole's off, whatever, all the other ones line up, it's not a problem. But thinking about it a little more, this makes sense because this measurement indicates that the bell housing needs to shift down and to the left, so down and towards the driver's side of the car. And that's exactly the direction that hole needs to move ever so slightly to line up. So I don't really think that's a coincidence. I think I should have probably picked up on that sooner, but I'm just honestly more surprised that we didn't see this on our first measurement. I assume we just didn't have the dial indicator set up well, or set up in a way that would give us an accurate measurement. So it's frustrating, but it is what it is. Now, the way you remedy this is you knock out the alignment dowels out of the block, which we've already done, and you get offset ones. So we bought them from Lakewood. I mean, in my opinion, it's very overpriced for what it is. Spent $132 on the alignment dowels. And to size them, you just divide this number by 2. So ideally we would have like around 12 thousandths dowels. Now, you can't get them in that size from Lakewood. I think it's like 4 thousandths, 7 thousandths, 12 or 14 thousandths. So we got the 14 thousandths one, so we're gonna be, in theory, I believe, like a thousandth or 2 off in the other direction. But that's within spec. You know, we're gonna be within that 5 thousandths alignment the other way. So that'll fix that, and then hopefully the trans will go together as it should. You know, that really killed our momentum. I mean, honestly, I think that might have been the big blow that prevents us from making it to the event I wanted to make it to, because the hope was to get this installed, and then we can very quickly start, you know, building around that, put the exhaust in, start mocking it up to, you know, have my buddy come and TIG weld that, get a measurement for the drive shaft so I can get my one that I had from last year for when I first did the swap turned down and all that stuff. And that kind of just killed everything once we found that issue, because we couldn't really proceed any further. We had to start taking things back apart instead of continuing to put things together. But in a more positive note, my dad was able to get a good jump on wiring and laying that out. We have an idea of where we're going to mount the ECU, which I can show you guys once we get to the other side of the car. But we have most of the, you know, wiring routed. We have, you know, the main power wire coming through the grommet on this side of the firewall. And then we just kind of have the engine bay harness just kind of draped over here for now. Like I said earlier in the video, we got to take the intake off to drill it for the map sensor. So like, there's no point in routing stuff under the intake just to take it back apart. So once the intake's back on after I do that, then we'll actually route those how we're going to. Some will be under the intake and come up, some will run on the side, but you know, we'll make that final decision once we're actually routing the wires. Got the dry sump tank finally installed. It's really cool to see it on here. Just looks awesome. You can't really get a great perspective from the clearance here. Like, it looks like it hangs out further than the door, but it doesn't actually if you're looking at it. We've had this mocked up with the fender. It barely clears the bracing, but it clears everything. We're looking good. So now I have to go through and just start getting an idea for routing. I have a 120 degree direct fit Frigola fitting that will go in here and then kind of wrap around and snake through, which I'd already test fit. This is our return, so I'll probably just do a 90 and run it over. And then this is for the vent to the breather can, which I just have a generic Moroso one. It's brushed aluminum. I might paint it like a crinkle black, we'll see. Catch can's probably gonna go here, but you know, I'll coordinate that as we're a little closer to getting everything finally installed. Another thing I did, which I didn't have on video, was I put the core support on here and just quickly tossed in the CNR Racing radiator to get an idea of where we need to be. I need to move these mounts, but these mounts are trashed because I've already cut them and moved them like I think 10 years ago when we first put an aftermarket aluminum radiator in the car. So I need to try and find a reproduction one and just start with fresh ones, or even maybe I'll just make a set. But you know, there's a lot of little things that are adding up here. You know, I was hoping this was going to go a little more smoothly, but it's the last 20% that takes 80% of the time. So, you know, can we still make that event? Honestly, I'm doubtful, because we really need to have made more progress last weekend, and had it not been for the transmission issues, we would have been in a lot better position. But also, I don't really want to rush it now that we're behind the ball. I don't want to just slap this thing together and cut corners just to make it to that event, since we had this setback. So we're just going to keep working on it at the same pace we've been working on it, and you know, where we end up, we end up. If we make it to that event, great. or, you know, if I miss that event and I have to wait, you know, another week or two to just go to another local autocross to shake it down, it's really not the end of the world. Well, that's gonna do it for this video. We finally hit the big milestone of installing the engine for what should be the final time in this swap, at least to get it running and going. But we've encountered a few setbacks. It's frustrating, but it's really not the end of the world. I mean, everything's been going smoothly, so some stuff was bound to come up. It sucks that it's not something that's our fault. It's, you know, just due to the variation in parts, but it's gonna happen. Once you start doing highly customized stuff like this and you're mixing and matching stuff, some stuff's bound to not work as it should. I've worked on cars long enough to know that even brand new off the shelf parts don't fit or work as they should all the time. They do the majority of the time, but not all the time. So subscribe if you guys want to see more, and stay tuned for the rest of this build series, and like this video if you enjoyed it. Feel free to comment below if there's something you want to see throughout the course of these swap videos, or if there's something you want to see in future videos, especially as we're getting out to events and racing the car. So hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.